find in the Gospel of Matthew 3 images that can help us understand the life and the nature of the church. These 3 images come from Matthew chapter 5, and they're found there. And those of you who have a Bible and haven't had it taken it from you, these are found in Matthew chapter 5, and reading from verses 13 just down to verse 16. So if you want to look up a really familiar part of the New Testament, Matthew 5, reading from verse 13, and then reading down to verse 16. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. Amen. In my last night in the town of Wolfville in Canada, I stayed in a boutique hotel, which just means that it's really small, and a really small room. And I stayed there because I no longer had the rental property. The dog was away in the kennel waiting to be shipped overseas. And so I stayed in this little hotel in the town where Suzanne and I had lived for the last 6 or 7 years. And the boutique hotel sits on the main street. And I did have a little balcony, but I hadn't paid the extra $15 to have a view of the sea. So I had a view of the street. This was a bad choice. And out of my window, hopefully, can you stick up the first slide? It's not responding. Yeah, so out of my window, this was the scene. Now, first of all, the town planners among you will notice how dependent they are upon above-the-ground cables. This, among other things, guarantees that every time there's a strong wind, there is no power, okay? And I didn't feel Canadian until the day I bought a generator, because I realized that this was going to be necessary if I didn't want my basement to flood every time there was a strong wind. However, behind that, what you see there is one of the busiest and most popular church buildings in the whole of Wolfville. All sorts of people go there, people from different backgrounds, people from different countries. People drive from the city to go like that. Now, this church wasn't always like that, and it wasn't like that when we moved into the town, because then it was a church. Today, it's one of the most popular restaurants in the whole of the area, called the Church Brewing Company. It's probably, to quote a little bit from Fred Craddock, it's probably just as well that it's a restaurant now, because there's people go to it now who might not have been allowed in when it was a church. In Matthew chapter 5, Jesus gives us 3 different images that represent and speak to us about the nature of the church. And last week we focused upon the city on a hill. And a city on the hill speaks about our life together as a congregation. We are a city on the hill, our common life together. The second of these, one that is connected quite closely to it, is you are the light of the world. And in our verses, these 2 metaphors mix. Jesus mixes 2 metaphors. He moves from light of the world to city on a hill back to light of the world. He does that. And to me, that is very significant, because I think it points to the fact that when he comes to talk about us being the light of the world, that he's talking about our common life together. When Jesus talks about us being the light of the world, he's now not so much talking about our life together, but he's talking now about our life as we relate to the world, to other people, among others, so that they may see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. This image of the light of the world now points to the mission of the church. If last week we spoke about our life together in a church, which is really important, this one points us away, as it were, from ourselves out and into the world. And I think one thing we really want to notice about that is that the connection between the city and the hill and the light of the world is a very close one. And for me, what that means is that this image is speaking to us about our corporate activity in mission. And what I mean by that is speaking to us about the things that you and I do, because as a congregation, we maybe instigate them, we certainly facilitate them, and we support them, and we do it by putting our resources, our building, our money, our staff, our people, our volunteers into those activities. The connection is city on the hill and light of the world. This is our corporate activity together in mission. The things that you and I as a congregation are saying, this is where we want to commit our time to in terms of sharing the light and the way of Jesus Christ with others. The other day I was driving along the A803. The A803 is a road that runs from Townhead in Glasgow. It runs up through Bishopbriggs into Kirkintilloch. It was a road I used to travel many a time. And if you're travelling in the A803, and if you're travelling from Townhead in Glasgow towards Bishopbriggs, on the left-hand side you have McDonald's, and on the right-hand side you have Springburn Baptist Church. Springburn Baptist Church is a white building that sits facing on one way onto kind of Springburn Road, and on the other side faces on to Galloway Street. And that was the church where I first served full-time as a pastor for 5 years in Springburn Baptist Church. So when I drove past it the other day, I felt, it's been a while, felt a little bit of kind of, nostalgia as I drove. And I remember a church meeting that we had in that church. And it was a church meeting where we called the congregation together because we wanted to agree an idea. Some of us in the church had an idea. I mean me. And 3 or 4 young students at the then International Christian College, or BTI, I forget what it was called in that particular period, who'd started to attend the church. And the idea, we come up with great titles, you'll hear that in this sermon, a couple of stunning names. We came up with this idea which we simply called Church Alive. And our plan was that one day a week we were going to have the church building open from 10 a.m. in the morning to 10 p.m. at night. And during that day, we would have a whole host and a whole range of activities. And so, for example, in that period, yes, we had a Bible study because I had to fit in the midweek Bible study somewhere. So, yes, we would have a Bible study. We would have a Keep Fit class. We would have lunches. We would have a cafe space. We would have a local community creche who would come in. We had a children's club. We had a children's clothing bank that ran all the time, and people could come in and pick up clothes and other kind of equipment, prams and stuff if they needed that because they couldn't afford it. We had a youth club, and then late at night, between 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night, we had a final kind of prayer meeting to round off the day. And so we gathered the church together to say, here is this idea that we have about Church Alive. And we wanted them to vote on it. And I wanted them to vote on it for 2 reasons. One was because in this church of the history, one most of us have, in the history of this church, they had built a multi-purpose building that they then fell out over trying to use it as a multi-purpose building. And so part of this plan was that finally, at long last, we were going to use the building that had been built as a multi-purpose. We were going to have a Keep Fit class in it. This was a big deal, trust me. And so I wanted them to agree that because this was a bit of a big deal. And the other reason I wanted them to vote on it, and this will sound strange, the other reason I wanted them to vote on it was because I knew that they would agree to do it. That is, I knew that they would agree to me doing it. I knew that they would agree to me and the students doing it. But I wanted them to vote on it because I wanted them to own it. And to own it didn't mean they all had to attend. And to own it didn't mean they had to attend anything. And it certainly didn't mean they had to attend everything. Although they could attend things that maybe suited or even drop in the cafe. But I wanted them to own it because the mindset is let me call it a theological mindset. The mindset is that if we were going to do this, we were actually doing it together as a church. It was not my thing. It was our thing into which we were about to put resources, money, time, and staff in order to make it happen. And I think that is quite crucial at times. And so here in the life of the church here, I'll tell you how I think. We have some people who run our children's work and our youth work. It is our work. We have a food bank, which isn't Roma's. It's our food bank. We have activities that we carry out in a whole range of ways that are ours and which we need to own as ours. It doesn't mean we always need to go to them, but we should be aware of them. We should be praying for them. We should be thinking about them. And wherever we need to, we should be putting in our resources, our time, our people, our volunteers, and our staff, because this is our light. You are a city set on the hill to be the light of the world. This is about our corporate mission together. And this corporate mission together, you are the light of the world. Do your good deeds before others so that they will come to praise your Father in heaven, of course, begins to take us into new communities. Again, remember, our mission statement in the church here, according to our website and everywhere else, summary of our mission statement is changing lives and changing communities. Who are these communities? They're most certainly the young people and the families of those who attend our clubs. They're most certainly the people who attend our food bank. But undoubtedly, they're surely also the people who are geographically located around this building. A church does not become a community church by calling itself one. It becomes a community church by becoming and being one. I'm going to put something up on the screen, an image. Those of you who like straight lines will hate this. So if you're really a straight line person, I'm sorry for my drawing, okay? Or my colouring in. My orange highlighter there. Now, and you'll see there, if you can see that, there's an us. That's us here this morning, right? That high-quality writing that you see there. And the school now. All this is here according to my guess. And according to what we did over Christmas, to me this probably highlights the nearest 500 houses around this church. That's all. 500 probably homes or doors around us. These are our kind of nearest neighbours, geographically speaking. And if we desire in some way to see them as a community whose lives and communities we are hoping to change, well, then we are going to have to find ways to have regular, sustained, and meaningful contact with them. And despite what some people might think, a website won't do that. It takes more. We need to find ways to have regular, sustained contact, perhaps an occasional invitation, but certainly taking opportunities to let people know that we actually exist and that we are here. I want to steal from Aileen, who in a conversation around this, she may or may not remember she said this to me, she probably will. I think that we will, if one of our goals, if an easy goal in some senses, is to have regular and sustained contact with these homes, a greater goal will be that from the side of the people who live in these homes, if there's ever an occasion where they feel that they would like to have a contact with a church, we will be their most natural thought. And therefore, in the times of bereavement, they might come to us and ask for help. Why? Because we have become their church. And this is part of our challenge, and to be light of the world is indeed to begin to connect with the communities that we desire to see transformed and changed of the world. I spent 5 years at Springburn. I was new minister, young, enthusiastic, all these kind of things that you are. And it was a fascinating period. And when I look back, I'm really intrigued by the sort of things we did and the places we end up and some of the things that happened during that period. When I was leaving the church, something happened that in some ways I found both delightful and also a sense of failure. So the delightful thing was that I had announced I was leaving. One day, I'm sure I was getting on a bus, and one of the women who lived in the street, who never came to our church, apart from a very famous Christmas Eve service, but that's a different story altogether, right? Apart from a kind of interesting Christmas Eve service that we ran once, she never came to the church. And I met her as there's a bus involved in this. She was either getting off the bus or I was getting on it or something like that. And she gave me an envelope. And it was a Marks and Spencer voucher. And she gave it to me. She said, "I've heard you're leaving." And I said, "But why are you giving us this?" And she said, "Because you were our minister." But the sad thing about that was I never succeeded in making Springburn Baptist their church. That's the challenge. To move it beyond it merely being me or another, to being they see us in our life together as for them and as here for them and present among them. One last thought in all of this about us being the light of the world is that being the light of the world, I think, requires discernment from us. It requires discussion. And it certainly requires decision, because we're going to put resources in, we're going to spend time. It requires support, it requires training, it requires all of these things as we as a church support those who on our behalf are doing some of these activities. But it also requires discernment, because let's try that sentence again. 1, 2, 3. It's simply not possible, that's what I was looking for, it's simply not possible for any congregation to do everything. And therefore, we need to make decisions about what is it that we are going to do. We need to make decisions about what do we have the resources for. We need to make decisions about what are we able to do. We need to make decisions, what are we hoping to achieve through what we are doing. And these are all decisions that need to be made. But we also need discernment. And discernment is asking Jesus, what do you want us to do in this community? The prayer is the wisdom, it's the seeking after the mind of God, because we do actually believe that the living Jesus is in the room. And therefore, he's got a mind that he may wish to communicate to us as to what we can and what we should be doing. Discernment becomes very important about our choices as to where we indeed want to shed the light of the world. Well, let me put this up. Well, I've got it. Hold on. I was given this about 3 weeks ago. The first time I ever wore this was, some of you weren't born. Some of you were. Some of you weren't born. It was 1989. I was the youth minister at Kirkintilloch Baptist Church. And some of us became aware that in the town there was a whole subculture of young people who we had no connection with. We had a pretty extensive youth ministry, plus a very, very large youth club at this time. But we realized that there was a whole group of young people, probably aged about 13 to 16, and they were into dance culture, heavy dance music. And we realized that we had no connection with them whatsoever. And they were too young to travel from Kirky to Glasgow at that point to go to the clubs. And so some of us felt we had some obligation to be a bit of light somewhere. And so we birthed Fat Bob's Dance Cafe. It was a dance event, and it was held in our church hall. It's actually very hard to describe it, unless you've ever seen a rave on television. Indeed, we had our DJ on a raised platform. We had ear-bursting sound system. We had the most modern lights that money could buy. The guy bought them, and then we paid them back month by month. We had a huge screen in the days where we couldn't really afford it, but we bought this white tarpaulin stuff that we then, with an iron, managed to melt together, and then put a loop at the end and hung this huge metal pipe through to give it the weight, and stretched it against one wall, and it took up the whole wall, about the size of the wall back there, and it took up the whole wall, and on that wall there we projected a whole variety of images, and we played the latest dance music that sometimes, as I say, bordered into rave music. It ran from 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock, one Saturday every month. It started, as I say, from 8, but we started setting up at 5:30. We finished taking it all down about 12:30 at night. It took a minimum of 27 volunteers. Everyone entered in the building was searched. We had a metal detector, and on some occasions we were so glad that among our volunteers we had an off-duty, usually plainclothes police officer, a nurse, and a GP. Some of the team never ever worked in the building. They always worked out at the back door in order to try and deal with people who were either thrown out, as happened on occasions, or were not given entry. And we wanted the back door also to be a safe space. We were trying to reduce harm in the car park, and we were trying to stop there being too many fights and the neighbours complaining. Our goal was pretty limited, I have to say, in that whole context. In many ways, the main ways in which we communicated were through the images that were shown on the screen. And throughout the evening, someone would say, "This is Fat Bob's Dance Cafe, brought to you by people who will worship in this building tomorrow." We did actually, out of that, we ended up with Fat Bob's Wee House Group. But again, that is another story for another time. I do remember one night, I had bought glow sticks. So we got delivered. By the way, we had an early website for this, right? Check this, 1989. And I bought glow sticks, and they were in the shape of a cross. You know, the kind of sticks that you crack them and then they all light up. I forget how that happens technically, but you've seen them or you've used them. And all of the volunteers, we gave them all one of these little plastic things around them. We hung them around our neck and we hid them. But we had an agreement. That at 10:30, everybody, all the volunteers, had to snap the glow stick. I was on the floor, which is normally where I was. I was on the floor in the main hall. And as I looked into the darkness in between all of the different lights, suddenly around the room, all these little green neon crosses began to appear. And I decided that for all the effort, that one moment was worth it. The kids loved it. They took them. We lost them. They danced out into the night with our little glow stick. It ran for 18 months, and then we stopped it. And we stopped it not because we couldn't do it anymore, because we could. We stopped it in part because the numbers began to decline. We had been surfing a cultural wave. It had become now a ripple. But we stopped it because we discerned it was time to stop it. Discernment starts and stops. Discernment needs to be able to, like we learned during the pandemic, to pivot. Discernment is, what is the living Christ saying to us now? Discernment is, what should we do now in the moment? And that's a challenge. That takes us beyond programs. It takes us into what we're doing now to shed light in this area and in this community. And that discernment can be very, very important indeed. And it can be very important right down to the level of what do we actually think we're doing through these events. We were very honest. This was deeply light touch. Back in Springburn, we ran a youth club. An open youth club. And I tried to take the kids to the Billy Graham campaign in Parkhead. I joke that I was thrown out. We came very close. Because we discerned wrongly. Our relationship with these young people was nowhere near enough that we could be taking them to an event to hear an old American speaking stuff that they didn't understand. We discerned wrongly. Discernment is really, really important if we want to be a light of the world. To be the light of the world is about our common mission. It's about our common mission as we seek to communicate with new communities and as we discern together, how do we do that? Oh, one last thing. In the Bible, the light and the darkness thing sometimes lives in tension. So I'm going to do what I did all these years ago with that kind of church meeting in Springburn and say this. To be the light of the world is messy, it is demanding, it's frustrating, it's hard work. It takes us into places and situations that we would rather not be. To be the light of the world will be demanding. To be the light of the world will cost us. To be the light of the world will mean things get broken. To be the light of the world will mean that we're having to work through hard times. But here, Jesus doesn't really give us the option. He says, you're a city set in the hill. You're the light of the world. So hopefully as we progress this year and forward, as the city set in the hill, we will be grasping our opportunities also to be the light of the world and changing lives and changing communities because of our presence among people, bearing witness to the person of Jesus Christ. Amen.